So chapters 23 and 24 combined with imperialism. In this portion of the Prezi I'm going to go through, it's only going to be the industrialization chapter, chapter 23. So the word of the day for this chapter is revolution. We see a lot of different types. There's intellectual revolutions, like we see with the Enlightenment, which is where different philosophers challenge the way life is. And generally what they're challenging is the social structure. They're challenging the political structure. So challenging the idea of a king, challenging the idea of a noble class being landowners. So the Enlightenment is where people start asking questions. We've talked about this in class somewhat, and you'll see more of it in the book and also when we get back from break. But this is a major intellectual challenge that leads to some political revolutions. There's problems in societies, and based on the previous, based on the intellectual, they try to solve those problems by saying, here's what we need to do. We need to get rid of the king, or we need to have a parliament, or we need to lower taxes, or we need representation, whatever. So the problems generally are in society and in the leadership. So then we see revolutions, such as in America and France. American Revolution, hopefully you know enough about and you're familiar enough with. There was no representation. The colonists were British citizens, but they didn't have all the rights of British citizens because they didn't get any votes in Parliament. So they basically wrote the most famous breakup letter in history, the Declaration of Independence, laying out a case, saying, King George, you've done this, this, this. You haven't done this, this, this. This is why we deserve to be our own nation. And they used the Enlightenment ideas like John Locke's life, liberty, property, Montesquieu's separation of powers, Voltaire's freedom of religion and press. So they use all those ideas to create a republic. So we're not a democracy in America, we are a republic. In France, it's a little bit of a different situation. In America, we just got rid of the king by creating our own country, and then we weren't part of Britain anymore. In France, they got rid of the king by chopping off his head and completely remaking the government. So there's a couple of things to see here. It's the Bastille was the king's armory and prison where he kept his weapons and political criminals. So the government is out of touch. The king, there's famine, there's inflation, the economy is terrible. There's people starving, and the government's just kind of out of touch. He's having big, lavish parties. He has beautiful palaces, like the palace at Versailles, which, by the way, you can visit if you go with me to London and Paris in June of 2016. Go to j.mp/bink-channel to find out more. Anyway, so then they storm. The people just kind of get fed up. There's a riot. They storm the Bastille. They break out whoever was there. They take the weapons so they can fight back against the king's forces. And then eventually they end up destroying the Bastille and making a bridge out of it. So they create a republic in name, but it soon loses that because it goes really, really radical. There's a couple of phases you guys need to make sure you look at in the notes talk through. The radical phase leads to something called the Reign of Terror, where a guy named Maximilien Robespierre was basically chopping off the heads of anyone who he didn't think was revolutionary enough, with a nicely named Committee of Public Safety. Well, somebody that was in charge of the Committee of Public Safety, and then a popular general, was Napoleon, and he takes over. So they go from being a republic to being an empire. He's proclaimed consul for life, which is like president for life, and then he's dictator and emperor. And he takes over lots of Europe. He starts conquering other territory, and so the borders of Europe start to change and becomes this Napoleonic empire. Until he loses, the British finally defeat him, and he's kicked out of France. They make him, he's exiled. And so after he loses, this map has to go back to the way it was, and so they start looking at the old order. Who was in power when he took over? Can they go back in power? And if they're dead or gone, well, do they have relatives that can take over? So they want to restore the old order. And this is where we see some of the isms: conservatism, liberalism, radicalism, socialism, nationalism. Now, socialists is something we'll see more with the Industrial Revolution. That's people who want the government to control production. Nationalists are people with national pride. Radicals are the ones who are like 100% voting for everybody, no government. They're very radical. Conservatives are the ones that say, let's go back to the way it was. Let's have this tradition, the traditional government, so let's put princes and kings back in power. Liberals are the ones who are saying, no, let's have no government involvement in our lives, or as much as possible. Let's have some voting rights. Let's have representation. Let's have a lot less government from what the conservatives want. This is not the same as what our phrases liberal and conservative are today, so don't bother using those phrases in your mind. So the revolution ideas start spreading is the problem, and they try to crack down because France kind of is a model. and other countries are like, oh crap, we're going to get our heads chopped off. Let's stop this. But the revolution spread, and it's important for you guys to know those countries, and then two countries in particular that end up getting unified, as I talked about previously in the other notes video. So we've got some social changes going on, like a social revolution. And when we have a population change, it's because of migration, people moving from countryside into cities. Culture is changing because of industry, especially when you have um, social classes being disrupted. Like in France, you have the three estates, which is the noble class, the clergy, and then the peasant class. And the peasants and middle class are the ones that kind of rise up and overthrow the other two. And so that results in huge cultural changes. But then industry changes culture too, because now people are working by the clock, and families are not living out in the countryside with big families that are maybe close knit, hard working families. Now you have people living in the cities where kids are working and everybody's trying to survive. The proletariat is something that we see the phrase a lot. It's particularly used by Karl Marx, and that's another ism, Marxism. Proletariat is the working class, like the peasant class, working class. So what we see is culturally, socially, there's some big changes. We have always had the rulers, people who are the upper class, and then like the land owners, and then you have people who are the workers. We didn't have a middle class before. It was just either you had money and land or you didn't. So with the new industrial middle class, now we have managers and like factory workers. So it's you don't own land, but you're also not a peasant working on the land. And then the Industrial Revolution. So make sure you follow this video up with the Industrial Revolution notes video.